So we're here to find out a bit more about what's happening at Gatwick, and I think we've got an audience who are aware of some of those things, but there may be other bits of information. So hopefully you'll leave this evening with a fuller picture of what Gatwick expansion means locally and what it means globally. So all of those things to think about. We've got some information around the room, and there's some information on some charts out there. And there is a sign-up sheet. If you're not on our mailing list and you want to hear about things, then do sign up so that you can be informed. We've got some speakers this evening, which we're very grateful for. So we're going to hear from 3 different people this evening. And then after that, we will have some time for questions. If you've got a question, I think if we hang on to the end, because it may well be answered as we go along. And then at the end of the evening, maybe we have time for some discussion, but we'll have a look and we'll see whether we think that's a good idea or not. Any questions at the moment? Anything anyone needs to know? Okay, so we're going to start by welcoming Sally Pavey, who's here from CAGNE, who are the Communities Against Gatwick Noise and Emissions, which I've half had, but have now actually got. So well, thank you very much for coming, Sally, and meeting you.
Okay. Right, good evening. So CAGNE is the umbrella group, aviation and environment group for Sussex, Surrey and Kent. And we've been going 10 years. And we were formed out of communities coming together. And when I started being involved with the whole aviation and Gatwick issues, environmental issues, green issues were just something that, you know, strange people thought about. It wasn't your everyday. And that's how much things have changed. And I think, obviously, one of the key points and turning points has been the formation of Extinction Rebellion throughout the country and throughout the world. So I have to say, you know, congratulations to those that have got actively involved in that. And also, whoever attended Gatwick at the South Terminal, well done, because your survey made headlines and it was amazing that you were able to stay there. Having worked with Plain Stupid back in 2014, when we had the polar bears dancing around the South Terminal, Gatwick weren't quite so understanding. And we had a few polar bears escorted out of the terminal rather rapidly, and me very hoarse from trying to sing a Gatwick song. But so I was delighted that you were able to stay, and also to have the Red Ladies there. Sorry, I'm not sure of their official name, but excellent to have them there. I think that probably hit home with a lot of passengers and a lot of staff as well, which is really important. So CAGNE is at the forefront of trying to oppose this second runway, and it's a new runway, let's be clear. It's not making best use, so it's not government policy. It is a new runway. Gatwick can only fly from one runway today. Bottom line is there is not 2 existing runways that they can fly concurrently today. So it's not policy, and we're delighted to see that actually the Planning Inspectorate has asked that question of Gatwick Airport. And our King's Council has been very clear that this is not policy. And we've also had an engineer look at the construction. One of the questions that the Planning Inspector put to Gatwick about the construction, how much construction? And so we've had an engineer look at that, and that's gone to our King's Council today. And it's all in preparation for deadline 3, which is the 19th of April. So there's various stages of a development consent order, which is what Gatwick's going through. It's a cheap way to get a new runway by the back door. I don't know if you saw the piece that we had in the Sunday Times some time ago now, I don't know time. It said it's a second runway by the back door. It brings no benefits. No benefits to local areas, no benefits to all the issues we face currently with the lack of affordable housing, the issues we face on highways. There's no sustainable transport. The sustainable transport plan does not add up. It's reliant upon third parties. So there's so many things that say this is not the right place, this is not the right time, and this is certainly not going to benefit those locally. But more importantly, it's not the right time to be doing this. Is any time right to be doing it? But when we're facing global warming, it's fundamentally wrong to be actually looking to airport expansion. And CAGNE is at the forefront of reforming a group called No Airport Expansion. There used to be a group back in 2014 about no airport expansion, which Councillor Essex was very much at the forefront of. It's now been reformed by a gentleman who led the Bristol campaign to oppose airport expansion at Bristol. And we're going to be holding an event at the House of Commons in May on the 22nd. And we hope a lot of candidates, parliamentary candidates, as well as current MPs attend that, especially from the shadow secretaries of transport, but we'll have to wait and see. Anyway, I diversify. You want to know about Gatwick and the sterling work you've done to date. So I just wanted to touch on a few bits on the climate issues, and you'll know better than I. But I was interested to see that this week the UN climate chief has warned there are only 2 years to save the world. The next 2 years are pivotal because the record-shattering health and race between countries to a new energy technology. Now that couldn't be clearer for aviation. They are racing to try and find how they can decarbonise to carry on growing as they are, uncontrolled at the present time. There's very little policy that actually constrains aviation. The UK reduced emissions by 52.7% since 1990, but the UK risks missing its UN goal of 68% cut by 2030. Now, aviation has been told that they have to use sustainable aviation fuel, mandatory, by 2030. So I mentioned that, and you'll see why I mention that as I go on. And I thought this other thing was even our British pint is at risk from climate change because the hops don't like the weather we're now experiencing. They like the cold and the frosts. And obviously we had the Human Rights Court ruling. The Swiss government had failed to protect its citizens from the effects of climate change. So I was wondering whether we'll see action like that taken in this country. Because there is a real failing. Aviation policy is failing us. It's enabling privately owned airports to obtain expansion through the back door because of this making better use of existing facilities, runways. It's enabling Bristol, Southampton, even Manston has used that policy. They have to re-tarmac the current runway, but they're all enabled to grow. Where's the joined up thinking when it comes to climate change? There isn't one. So each one of them can deny the emissions from the aircraft, but they will deal with the emissions on the ground. So at Gatwick, we've got now electric vehicles or fire engines that are being run by fat fuel. The alternatives are all required to heat homes as well. So we're all going to be fighting for the same substance, and aviation needs a lot of substance to produce sustainable aviation fuel. So for them to be mandatory by 2030 is highly unlikely. And hydrogen, well, hydrogen, you're going to have a completely different fleet of planes because hydrogen takes up a lot of space. So there'll be fewer passengers and you've got to have new design planes. They're not even on the drawing board. So they're not going to be commercially flying for 20, 30 years? This runway will be up and running at Gatwick very quickly. And then they'll think about paying for the other things that they're promising. Those minor things like the new highway just outside their front door. So the runway comes first and that will fund the other things that they're promising. Now, one thing that perhaps not many people think about is how many more toilets. Well, there's not going to be any new toilets, but there'll be more planes, and planes have a minimum of 2 toilets per plane. So where is the sewage going to go? And I know it's a grim thought, but I don't know if any of you've read the Thames Water relevant representation they submitted to the Planning Inspectorate. Yes, I'm glad I'm not alone. And they say they have no objections to this new runway, but they want to talk to Gatwick and negotiate with Gatwick about sewage works. Well, we all know that the sewage works are overflowing currently, and we produced this report. I bought a few of them, but you can see it online. And this went into the Planning Inspectorate, and it talks about the rainfall that we're going to see and the increasing rainfall. And it talks about how many toilets you need and how much sewage it produces. So you've got 80 million passengers, you've got 14,000 workers, additional workers, you've got construction over 14 years. Now, how many portaloos is that? So where is the sewage going to go? But wait for it. Wiz announced yesterday they're going to turn poo into sustainable aviation fuel. So we're okay. We're okay. So all that sewage are actually going to the planes, and the planes will fly on poo. So we're okay. But that's not actually going to be manufactured till 2030. And we don't know quite how much they'll be able to manufacture. So they're all grasping at these straws to say, look, hey guys, we can expand, we can do all of this, because we can mitigate everything. And if there is one word that I absolutely hate these days, it's mitigation or mitigate, because it's really fundamentally not able. You're not able to mitigate in any way possible a new runway at Gatwick Airport. If this new runway was to be the same capacity, the same number of planes, but to reduce delays and to reduce the holding, you might go, well, yes, I can see the saving in CO2 there. But it's not. It is for massive growth. So it's 101,000 extra flights a year. So that's going from 285 to 365 at the end of it. And the horror of what carbon that adds to the airport is not added into the whole country. And you can't mitigate it by having a few electric vehicles and putting cooking oil into your fire engines that never do much, really, thankfully, never do much apart from practicing. So you have to start to say to yourself, well, is this a good idea? And I think we would all agree in this room that it's not a good idea, and that we all should have a voice in saying it's not a good idea. Because at the end of the day, the only benefits that come from this second runway are the shareholders. There aren't sustainable jobs coming. If the jobs come at all, we see time and time airport expansion saying all these jobs will come, but they never actually materialise. But where are they going to live? CAGNE produced another report about the cost of trying to live locally to Gatwick Airport, so that this sustainable transport plan could actually work. So you walk and cycle to work. Well, you can't afford, if you are making coffee, even if you're a pilot at £22,000 a year, £22,000 a year, yeah, that's right. You can't afford to live locally. Crawley is expensive. And if you go outside of Crawley, you're getting more and more expensive, and you can't afford to rent. And then you need hospitals, you need healthcare. How are you going to get there? So if you work for Gatwick, you get free parking. And can you afford an electric car if you're cabin crew and you're earning £14,000 a year? So all these questions are missed when you get the headline of 14,000 extra jobs with a new runway. So all those pointers, we as a community group and an environment group are addressing at the Planning Inspectorate and are submitting written reports on all those key things. We have been fortunate with crowdfunding and with donations, and possibly some of you have donated, that we have a very strong King's Council who has fought Heathrow. She's party to fighting the Jet Zero policy, and she's fought at Southampton. She's leading our team of experts, which is a qualified transport gentleman who's also KC, air quality, and a aviation noise. Quite hard to get an aviation noise expert, but we've got one of the best. He's young, enthusiastic that he has just finished on the Luton hearing. And the reason why we have employed experts is because you're up against Gatwick's experts. You have to go like for like when it comes to a planning process. You have to provide the planning inspectorate with facts that they know come from a credible source, i.e. someone who is a qualified air quality person. And I can tell you from the transport and from the air quality, the modelling that Gatwick has submitted is not poor, it is not comprehensive, it is lacking any substantial detail. It is not conforming to what they are required to conform to. And it's great that we can challenge them on a level playing field here and have the planning inspector actually quote the evidence that we've provided them with. And on the aviation noise front, again, they are not doing anything near what even Luton offered on the noise envelope. It's something that's meant to guarantee what noise you'll endure, but it's a very limited area that it comes out to. It doesn't come out as far as Reigate. And so the noise envelope that Gatwick is offering with much, much fewer flights is not even that good that they offered at Luton. And so it's poor. And it was really interesting to see the local authorities, King's Council, and a team of acoustics taking notes from our noise expert, because they've seen him in action at Luton and they know he knows his stuff. And so we hope by putting forward and challenging at this time that we can prove to the planning inspectorate that this is a flawed proposal and has credible enough doubt that it should not be allowed to go ahead as a new runway. Not through this policy and not in this area. And we believe that it's better to try and convince the planning inspectorate than it is for the planning inspectorate to perhaps go forward with a recommendation of approval to the Secretary of State for Transport, who will make the final decision. And that could be next year, so that could be a different Secretary of State for Transport. It could be Labour, we don't know. It's better to do that because a judicial review, a JR, is expensive, really expensive, and it won't change the outcome. It will just make them go through the process again. And so it's better to try and spend the money now, and CAGNE is committed to this, than to wait. So we are throwing everything plus the kitchen sink at this right now to try and stop this new runway, because it's not good for us, it's not good for the area, it's not good for the local area's environments, it's not good for our quality, it's not good for the infrastructure. But most importantly, if we are seriously going to reduce global warming, there should be no airport expansion at this time, and policy should really dictate that. Until they can become completely decarbonised and fly decarbonised planes that produce no emissions. And SAF, actually, sustainable aviation fuel, when it comes out of the engines, still produces. So it's not this really greeny, lovely answer to everything. It still pollutes, as do the planes coming and going, because the ultrafine particles still come, and still come from the tyres. So our answer is no airport expansion, especially at Gatwick at this time. And that's why we're a dedicated team to this for so many reasons. And like you, delighted to see this. Our environmental campaign, Pledge to Fly Less, we've had real inroads with the Civil Aviation Authority that we want to inform flyers, inform them at the time of booking your ticket. This is the emissions you'll be releasing. So like a packet of cigarettes, you're informed, you can make an informed decision. Do I fly or not? Did I know that? We want to educate the flyer. Not say you can't fly, but say, look, And the CA like this, the MPs like this, because you're not dictating. You're not telling someone not to do something. You're saying, did you know? Do you know how much damage flying's doing? So this, I'm sure, a lot of people went, gosh, I've just landed. Wonder what my emissions were. I'm going to stop there and say thank you very much for listening to me. I hope I didn't go too round the houses and back to the runway again. But shall I stop there?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Sally. It's good to hear how much is happening and so many issues and so many things to cover. So then we have Jonathan Essex, who's a Surrey County Council councillor, which is pretty impressive. But beyond that, he understands how public inquiry works, and that's really impressed me because it's complex. So over to Jonathan.
Thank you, and just to say, I'm here speaking as the deputy of Gatwick Area Conservation Campaign, which alongside CAGNE brings together groups around the airport campaigning against the expansion. Different tactics, but I think it's good that we have two groups with very different tactics because that maximises the chances of success. So what I thought would be useful to do is maybe just give a quick slideshow whizzing through some of the scale of the impacts of Gatwick, which hopefully contrasts with what Sally's done very much around the campaigning side of things. It's far more than making better use of an existing runway. What they want to do is move a runway by 12 metres sideways, so it's in a different place. They want to build expansions to the terminals, 3 new hotels, there's masses more car parking, most of which they've got approval for already. So it feels like they just want unconstrained car parking, which isn't the way to get the modal shift from highways to rail, which they promised. Motorway widening. So if you drive down there and you know the north and the south terminal roundabouts, the south terminal roundabout will be a grade separated interchange. That's the scale of the increase of surface transport movements they're looking at. They haven't really looked at flight paths or night flights because that's done in separate consultations. So it's very much a cloak and dagger affair. They've hidden what many people would consider some of the major issues to local people and put it in a different place. Main construction, they say, is from 2024 to 29, ... continuing to 2038. Well, my maths is that's not 5 years, it's best part of 15-year construction process. So it's an absolutely massive project that will have impacts during the construction as well as in the long term. They say we need it. There's no demonstrated need for this. And frankly, there's no demonstrated need for the overall increase of night flights, which they could get by just intensifying the use of the existing runway while saying no new night flights on the one next door. Employment, they say it's going to benefit by creating lots of jobs. What they don't tell you is that for the last 20 years, automation has happened within the airport industries. There's been a 2% loss of employment every year. So what this would do is keep the employment levels at Gatwick at the end of their period the same as it is today. So what that cries out is that if you want more jobs, you're not going to get it from Gatwick. So all they're doing is automating and reducing the skill level, reducing the pay level for people who work on the airport. So if you want a different future for the next generation locally, you can't look to the airport for those jobs. And an economic benefit, for example, the flights that bring overseas passengers to the UK, they count the economic benefit. The flights that take UK residents out of the UK to go on holiday, which is far more from Gatwick, they say, oh, I'm not sure about that. So that they very much choose what they want to include and what they want to exclude. And the net tourism impact of Gatwick Airport, as we all know, is not to bring people in, but to take people out. And what we're doing is the people we bring in benefit the London economy. The people who leave could have gone on holiday in places around the UK. Blackpool is the poorest local authority area in the UK. So by taking more people out of the UK on holiday, what we're doing is we're increasing the inequality because we're pumping more money into London and we're taking money away from our seaside resorts around the UK. So rather than levelling up, Gatwick expansion plans will effectively increase inequality. Passenger numbers. So simply put, this isn't just making use of an extra bit of runway. This is Gatwick wanting to be as big in the future as Heathrow is today. And if you want to talk to anyone about that, just say that. That's how big is their expansion plans, from this little tweak, from making one runway into two, or as they might call it, a dual runway operation within one airspace. We know what Gatwick looks like now. But this is the most curious bit of their plans. North and South Terminal here. They want to build a huge 10,000 square metre extra pier alongside. You could almost call this a Western terminal. It's 10,000 square metres. That's a hectare in size. Absolutely massive. And they've got this transit system to link to it. Now, they don't talk about that in their plans. So I think, okay, well, is that the extent of it? Well, no. As well as having this extra runway, what they want in this planning application is to safeguard the land to the south still for what they would call a second runway. Now, if we go back to what they proposed to the Airports Commission back down in 2014-15, at that stage we had the existing runway and a new runway to the south, and an absolutely massive terminal between the two. And their aim was to keep building this as the demand goes up. What they've got a planning application now is to put a pair of runways here. Well, what if they still had this in the back of their mind? What if they were still safeguarding this bit to the south, which they are? They could then have two dual runways. If one dual runway can make Gatwick as big as Heathrow is today, then that, as an ultimate goal, which they allude to by wanting to continue to safeguard the land to the south, would make Gatwick into the hub airport for London, displacing Heathrow's primacy, and then becoming the largest single carbon emitter in the UK, if you include the flights. Obviously, Drax is the biggest on the ground, but with the flights, it would make it absolutely huge. So, and that's what capitalism is. It's one airport competing with the other to be the biggest and the best without any constraints from government or any policy constraints to stop Gatwick doing what it wants to do. So I think that's its ultimate ambition. And this would be the first step on the way of the plan. As Sally said, an extra runway through the back door, but they still want their chance to make something absolutely humongous in the future. Well, we've analysed that, and we reckon that their existing plans for the new pier and the north and south terminal improvements don't get them anywhere near what they need for their 80 million passengers. So it looks like what they're trying to do is float this idea, and then at some point, I imagine during the construction process in the next 10 years, they'll want to then put something in, an extra runway to the south, to actually achieve their 80 million passengers at the time when people want to fly. What they're saying is they can get 80 million passengers by having people flying at all funny times of the day, extending the period each day when people fly. So they don't need any more terminal space because people are just arriving and going at different times. Well, that's frankly not the game. I think what they're trying to do is get permission now for the amount of noise, the amount of carbon emissions, the amount of surface transport emissions, the amount of air pollution that this scheme would generate with 80 million passengers. And then I think they want to, as Sally has very rightly put, take this backdoor application and then reveal to the world what their real plans are. And I don't think it's what they put on the table so far. So huge impacts, 70% more passengers, 35% more planes, more planes, more flights, more noise, CO2 emissions up by 50%. What that means is that the emissions from the planes, together with the surface transport and their ground operations, would total over 5% of what the UK's carbon budget is for 2038. Why 2038? That's an interesting date for two reasons. Firstly, is when they're going to build by. And secondly, that's the time when the UK is committed to include international aviation within its carbon targets. Now, if Gatwick's 20th, Heathrow's bigger, then you can see that aviation's emissions are significant. And that's based on the UK's methodology for calculating the impact of flights. If you consider the impact of contrails, the water vapours, greenhouse gas multiplying effect at altitude, then you could be looking at 2 or 3 times that number. Road widening and rail congestion. So on the one hand, they're widening the road, which will suck in more traffic, but they're not making any improvements to the local roads. So that means that the congestion on the local roads would be magnified because you've increased the capacity of the big roads around the airport. And then at the very same time, they've said the passengers are going to go people on the trains. And what that means is that the idea of anyone else using the Gatwick main line is going to be pretty much starved out of possibilities, because you're going to be standing remotely at many times a day based on purely people travelling on the Gatwick main, on the Brighton main line to Gatwick. I guess they'd like to call it the Gatwick main line. Wider impacts on nature and biodiversity. Really hard to see what that is at the moment, because if you look at that grand plan, which this sort of backdoor application doesn't really cover, the total scale of impact of the terminal and all of the externals that really would be needed to support 80 million passengers aren't in this planning application. So just like Heathrow, does an extra terminal, then does an extra runway, then does an extra terminal, then does an extra runway. I think Gatwick are playing the same game. So here's the runway plan. Right, well, as soon as that's approved, I bet you bottom dollar there'll be a terminal plan, and I bet you after that there'll be a plan for the other runway will come in, so that they'll keep flipping one to the other. So nature and biodiversity, there are impacts on bats, there are impacts on other species, but they're very much glossed over in this application. So carbon emissions, well, they say it's not significant. That's because they only count this blue bit as the bit they're responsible for. They ignore the red bit, which is travelling to and from the airport in the UK, and they ignore the green bit, which is the flights. And it's overall together which we really need to consider. Gatwick therefore say, because they only consider this little blue bit, they say it's not significant. Well, clearly that isn't, but this is, and that is definitely more significant than that. In fact, that's where we are at the moment. London Heathrow is the largest carbon emitter in the UK, and in terms of airports, it's the second largest in the world. So Gatwick are claiming that making their airport as big as Heathrow, which is the second biggest carbon emitter on the planet for aviation, won't be significant on climate grounds. Well, there's a promise, isn't it? Now, I think that's summed up on the next slide, really. I just imagine a couple of Conservative politicians sitting in a pub and trying to think what rhymes with net zero that we can use to apply to the aviation industry. And, it sounds like greenwash, doesn't it? Well, if it sounds bad, it probably is. This is a group called Safe Landing, and they specialise in talking the truth, and they've done some challenges to this jet zero policy. I mean, it goes something like this. You may have seen in the news about this one flight, or before we get onto this, flying without emissions, how hydrogen is green aviation. This was from Davos. But the things you might want to spot is it's only focusing on a 20-seater plane, and it talks about the company's mission to create this in the future. BP, incidentally, note this: aviation is one of the hardest industries to reduce carbon emissions because it's only for the smallest aircraft you can use hydrogen, and therefore we really need to focus on liquid fuels. So that's what BP is saying. So, okay, there was one flight of sustainable aviation fuel last November, but that day, I looked at the data, that day there was 100,000 flights that day. So they've claimed they've made a transition because 1 in 100,000 has done things differently. But the problem is scale. There isn't enough land to grow the fuel for these planes without taking that land away from either conservation areas or food growing areas. That's the reality. And so the amount of water used, the amount of energy used, you need to take something away to make space for this. So all it is a mirage to support the oil industry's continuing desire to supply fuel to burn in the sky. As long as sustainable aviation fuel is more expensive than kerosene, and as long as there's no government subsidy to use it, then airlines, who are a cheap business, do what they can at lowest cost, will not do it. So at the moment, what the airlines are doing is lobbying the government to pay to get the extra costs for the investigation. So you have to wonder who's behind this sustainable aviation fuel. And then greenwashing. I've put this slide in because this really annoyed me. Myself and Sally and other members of this growing campaign have been encouraged to call out this, which is some clever advertising around London underground stations, because Luton Airport has said we can grow, but they're going to have some conditions on their planning application to say if we create too much noise or we create a little bit too much traffic, or the carbon emissions PS only in our buildings and perhaps even our surface transport, but not the overall ones. So again, that minuscule bit rather than the whole lot. If they exceed their amount, then we'll stop the planes in their tracks. So you're going to stop the environmental, if we miss our environmental limits, which include the emissions from the planes, if we miss our environmental limits for what's produced in our buildings, then we'll stop the planes. But we'll ignore the carbon emissions in the planes. And the irony we've got at Gatwick is this green controlled growth approach, Gatwick haven't bothered with. So what's happened? The councils have stepped in and they're arguing that Gatwick needs to be as green as Luton. That's basically their gambit. They're saying you can't build that highway widening plan until you've got the modal shift. So let's put a thing to make sure you actually, but the problem is, once you've built the widened highway and you've got unconstrained car parking, surely people are going to flip back to using the car because the trains are more expensive. Absolutely crazy. You could, so in theory, they'll say, how much can noise increase? Okay, well, they say each plane's slightly quieter so you can have more planes flying over because each one overall wakes you up less often, or something like that. Either way, I'm confused. And then carbon, you do the same, but you predict into the future and say, well, this is the number which we can allow it to increase based on this mythical jet zero policy from government. Well, we don't need green constrained growth. We just need to stop the growth of Gatwick. And then we've constrained the impacts of Gatwick. So I think we just simply say, just don't expand. And then there's the jobs thing. This is a really silly graph. I don't know if because you might not be able to see the line here, so I'm going to use my finger. So this is what happens in the recession, 27 to 2020. Flights went down, then they went back up again. What happens with jobs is they went down and they didn't go back up. So what's happening to aviation is we're getting more flights for the same number of jobs at the airport. This incidentally is work done by the New Economics Foundation, which GACC have employed to basically analyse the economic case done by Gatwick Airport. Because alongside Sally and her excellent team's work on the impacts, we also need to challenge their stupid claims side of the argument. So it's loops. So we know about noise and night flights. 40% more road traffic. I thought I should put this slide in. It is possible for airlines to subsidise rail travel because they have done in the past. EasyJet used to give 20% discount on Gatwick Express, and the first ever commercial service from Gatwick to Paris included a first-class rail ticket from Victoria in the price. So that's where we started at Gatwick. So we could do that again. There's absolutely no reason why that couldn't be part of the story. But I think the biggest challenge, though, is we've just got to stop it happening. Air quality. Let's skip over that. Water and flooding. Did you know that the historic village just to the south of Gatwick Airport was called Lowfield? Does that not just say it all to you? But Gatwick, ably challenged by Sally's QC, have tried to argue that in terms of the flooding impact, they've got two projects. They've got a highway project and they've got a runway project. And they can take the highway's 100-year return period for flood risk for the highways project, but presumably because they want to build this second runway that they're not yet talking about yet through the back door, they're saying this runway is only going to last for 40 years, so we can underplay the climate impact of the flooding. And that links directly to the sewage impact, because the sewage collection from Gatwick Airport is pumped through 8 pumping stations to Crawley and 8 pumping stations to Hawley. The Hawley one goes through a 300mm diameter pipe. It's absolutely massive. And Gatwick's modelling said in the future with all these extra toilets, it's fine on a dry day, but on a rainy day, our sewage will overflow Hawley Sewage Works. Well, why do people go to the toilet more on rainy days? That's what I want to know. Well, what actually happens is Gatwick have put a lot of the surface water drainage, which runs off their runways, straight into their sewage system. And they're not proposing to address that currently in this application. So what they want to do is nick water from the water scarce area to the south of the airport, which will damage the Arran and Triple SI nature areas. And then they want to be able to have that together with all of the rain that happens on a rainy day, dump it in the River Mole and flood Leatherhead and everywhere downstream. It's clearly the not sustainable approach for water. What they should be doing is putting proper water conservation measures in place. And what we think they should be doing is doing all of those things, regardless of whether the airport expands or not. It's a good opportunity now to argue for the better control of what we have now. Nature, I said, well, the landscape impacts haven't really been looked at, but that's a challenge. So I just want to talk briefly now, towards the end, about the process, because it's a horrific process. It's like a planning application, but it's like an Uber planning application. First of all, you have to register to have a say. So many of you, I think, might have registered. The deadline for that was back in November. Now they've got a 6-month process, 6-month timeline, where there's an examination in public of this planning application. So different groups like CAGNE and GACC, councils and many individuals, nearly 5,000, the most ever for this type of application from the government, have 6 months to basically play ping pong, mainly in writing, but occasionally we get an opportunity to go and have our say and raise questions at a hotel down in Crawley. And at the end of August, that process ends, and then the Government Planning Inspectorate, PINS, have got 3 months within which they've got to tell the government what their recommendation is, which my understanding is that will take us to the end of November. People are talking about general election middle of November at the moment, but I guess it could be any time up until the 4th of January. The Secretary of State then has 3 months to decide, in theory, but in practice, sometimes they've taken longer on these sort of processes in the past. So you can see that there's this bit, which a few of us are engaged with now, but then there's a question of what do the MPs think? What do the councils think? What do the politicians think? What's the view of the new government? Does the new government think that the aviation policy of the UK that's making better use of existing runways should be written up and started again? Does the new government, for example, think that the Jet Zero policy isn't worth the paper it's written on? In fact, there's 2 outstanding legal challenges on that. And might there be a collection of different parties potentially elected around Gatwick Airport? I think there is a potential, certainly for the Lib Dems fighting hard in some Surrey seats, and Crawley may well change hands. So that might be the 3 major parties all could have political representation around the airport. So, and they could all make the case that the Secretary of State should not make the decision themselves, but actually put it to Parliament for a vote and really encourage their parties to take a stronger position on airports expansion, on climate change during the general election, and then in the government of whatever mix-up that follows. And then, as Sally's already mentioned, there's the potential for legal challenges. So I would say, please do get involved. There's plenty of local groups and opportunities to have your say, both directly in the process and trying to influence the planning inspectorate. But also, I think what we need to do is raise the profile of this issue, so the enormity of the scale of the impact it's likely to have on the local area is truly understood. And do any of you remember Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy? Yeah. So I remember one of the opening episodes of that TV programme. He was lying in front of a JCB and said, "Don't dig this up." And someone said, and the guy came along and said, "Didn't you see the planning application?" He said, "No." "Well, where was it posted?" "Well, in the planning office." "Well, whereabouts?" "Well, if you went into the office and then through the trapdoor and then downstairs and through the crowded basement, and then you found the hidden disabled toilet, it was posted underneath the lid of the toilet." But it's too late now. So the opportunity now, there's no point waiting until it's too late. We need to have a say now while this process is going on. But be aware that once this process ends, the planning process, this is a bit like, at the end of it, a planning officer in the local council recommending to the planning committee something should go for approval or refusal. That's what we're playing for at the moment. After that, you've still got the planning committee who get to say whether that planning application should go ahead or not. And the most crucial ones tend to be debated by councillors locally. Well, the equivalent of this nationally is the government should debate it. The MPs should behave like the councillors, and they could accept or overturn whatever the planning inspectorate say. So we have an opportunity all the way through, and that's all I was going to say. So thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan. People can see there's just so much to think about, so much to cover. But I mean, airports exist because people get on planes, and just to have a couple of minutes to ask James to explain how you've managed to get people who get on planes to actually come and say what they think, and I think that's very important.
Yeah, hello. I'm James Knapp. I'm with XR Dorking, and it's a great privilege to join people who really know what they're talking about on Gatwick. I've mostly been campaigning against oil wells and things like that, although I have visited Farnborough Airport and Newton Airport in the past as well to try and disrupt the private flights that go from there, but never done anything on Gatwick. But yes, this came out of XR Clear Skies, which Steve and Rob set up to do outreach in Gatwick, I think in 2019. And they told me that they'd always had a good response from the passengers. Passengers are usually quite aware that they're flying too much and want to fly less. They were there just doing outreach and giving leaflets out, and they said the police were quite easygoing with them. So we just went in there on a hunch that we might get a good result, and it was interesting. Yeah, we've got about 40 people there. We had I think 6 Red Rebels who are, if you've never seen them, they're just dressed up with quite out of this world red dyed outfits with white faces and headdresses, and they walk around just pointing at things, and it sounds strange, but actually it really changes the atmosphere. Everything goes very quiet and people watch what they're doing and then look at things. It works really well. We had a sort of 10-foot high Earth figure, someone dressed up as the world, with what more flights on a board, and so it was just that mixture of something a bit creative and a bit funny as well. And but really, it was just a question of like handing leaflets to people coming off planes and saying, "Would you put a sticker on our chart?" And the results were, when we added them up, I think we had 330 stickers across 2 boards. You can see where they landed. Gatwick is big enough, got the most stickers, and then this one, which is really the most extreme statement in a way. Climate change is real. We must act like it is, because if we were acting like it was, we would be peaking our emissions by 2025. Which is way beyond when this is projected to start creating extra emissions, isn't it? And then we should be, because the curve is going up, it needs to come down. But yeah, so again, if you count up all the stickers, you get to a point where just over 90% of people disagree. Feel that Gatwick expansion plan should not go ahead. And that's telling, because all of those people are flyers. They've come straight off a plane. We have people in departure lounge as well, so they're either going. They're busy people, hard to stop. But when they engage, they were 90% against Gatwick expansion. I think that gives a bit of a cause for hope. Actually, we'll certainly be finding one of the speakers in the open planning floor meeting, the open floor meeting at the planning inspectorate to bring this information to them, because there's no climate case for this. There's no passenger demand for this. The only case is the businessmen think they have a case for expansion, but I think the world that they think exists has actually gone now. We can't be expanding fossil fuel use. And yeah, I think someone once said to me, the fastest way to turn fossil fuel into CO2 is putting it through a jet engine, and they just want to do more and more of that. So yeah, it can't go on, can it? Thank you very much.
Yeah. Thank you, Jane. So then we come to Rob, who visits a lot of airports but doesn't really fly. Explain what that's about.
Reminded me, talking about playing stupid and polar bears, I did have a sort of interaction with them. I think 2015 we cut our way through the fence at Heathrow at about 3 in the morning and raced across this big field. And we had a backup plan if the police should intercept us. So we raced across like a couple of 100 yards and set up all our lock-on stuff. And then nothing happened. There were no searchlights and no sirens, and in the end we had to ring the police and say, oh, we're on the runway. And then it sort of lightened up. But it is amazing just to see how far things have gone, because I remember a long time ago going to one of the, I can't remember which group it was, going to one of the meetings and saying, you know, what are you doing about climate change? And they said, oh, we don't talk about that, you know, just sort of go away, sort of thing. And now it's, you know, it is really pretty near the top of the agenda. And it's Extinction Rebellion actually made a big jump, because before that it was these little groups, and somehow I guess the time was right. And I remember there was, you know, since COVID I can never remember names, I'll blame it on that. But you know, it's just the time was right, and David Attenborough was doing things, and that young lady from Greta was doing things. And it just came together, and now it just seems it is up there at the top of the agenda. But when they say, like, we've got 2 years to stop it, we have to realise that, you know, that's like, we might be able to stop it. You know, you could have said 10 years ago you've got 2 years to stop it and you've got more chance. So we do need to do things, and it's just, you know, there's just so many ways you can do things. There's these groups, you can do things about airport expansion. And with Extinction Rebellion, it's like just, you know, it's not just the carbon, it's the whole environmental issues and everything. The population is growing and growing, and we've got a finite world, and we're just about, you know, we've just got to take huge steps. So, yeah, I didn't have anything too special to say, but just, yeah, we need you, you know. And if you feel anxious and worried about the future, then the best solution is to do something, because you feel good when you do something, and it can have effect. You know, it has had effect, and the more and more people that do things, the more effect we can have. So, you know, it's a win-win. You can do something and you can feel good about it. So thank you all.